I'm Jessica Berman. I'm the director of the Drescher Center for the Humanities, and on behalf of the Drescher Center, the GWSST core faculty, coordinating committee, and affiliate faculty, I'd like to welcome you to the 12th annual Korenman Lecture in Gender and Women's Studies. In the Korenman Lecture Series, we seek to highlight the wealth of contemporary scholarship on gender and sexuality that is being produced across the disciplines. The series is named for Dr. Joan Korenman, who is the founding director of Women's Studies at UMBC, as well as the founding director of the Center for Women in Information Technology and emerita professor of English. I can honestly say that we wouldn't have such a vital intellectual community in the Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies program, the English department, or in the humanities in general without her leadership. And this year, her lecture, the lecture is sponsored not only by the Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies Department and the Drescher Center for the Humanities, but also the Media and Communication Studies Department and the English Department. I want to just take a moment to point out to you that this talk is part of the Humanities Forum, and it marks our opening for the season, the start of an ongoing series of what we hope will be very lively discussions. So I want to encourage you to take a look at the flyers we have around, or at the Drescher Center website, dreschercenter.umbc.edu, to see what's coming up. You can also engage with us on social media. Follow the Drescher Center for the Humanities on Facebook and at UMBC Humanities on Twitter. And before I step away from the podium, I want to invite you to attend the next Humanities Forum event, which is coming up next Monday, March 4th, 4 p.m. in the Library Gallery, a panel discussion on race and religion in the U.S., Women Writers in Conversation. And this is a panel featuring Samia Bashir, poet, Susan Mouadi Daraj, fiction writer, and Aliyah Malek, journalist and author. And it will be moderated by our own Mejdouline Shumali, assistant professor in GWSST. After the writers perform short excerpts of their work, she will moderate a conversation on writing, gender, race, and religion in the U.S. So we'll try to keep the discussion going till next week. And then to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Carol McCann, the chair of Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies.
We are delighted in Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies to partner with the Drescher Center, Media and Communications, and English departments to present tonight's speaker. We're very excited. And I am honored to introduce Sara Ahmed. She's a prolific feminist scholar who has written extensively about how power is experienced and challenged in everyday life and in public culture. Through 9 books, she elegantly deploys tools of intersectional feminist cultural analysis to interrogate institutional structures and the subjective effects of racialization, heteronormativity, heteropatriarchal gender assignment. In her 2017 book, Living a Feminist Life, she described her analytic method as, and I'm paraphrasing, following words around, of attending to the same words in different contexts, listening for resonance. In this way, she has brought to light the shifting meanings in everyday forms of speech that construct institutional inclusions and exclusions and subject formation. Her 2004 book, The Cultural Politics of Emotion, outlines how texts affect us, how they animate emotions that move us into alignment with national ideologies. In her 2006 book, Queer Phenomenology, she showed how everyday interactions in public and family life assign us to gender identities and direct us to well-worn heteropatriarchal pathways. And in Willful Subjects in 2014 and Living a Feminist Life in 2017, she details the kinds and costs of resistance, of speaking up, of speaking out, of taking alternative paths. Her work has profoundly influenced a number of fields, including affect theory, cultural studies, critical race studies, queer theory, and feminist theory. Her writing appears on course syllabi in all of these fields, as well as in social media and her feminist Killjoys blog, which I highly recommend to you. While certainly wide-ranging, her work is nonetheless, I would argue, relentlessly feminist, hewing to the deepest tenets of the feminist epistemological project. It is grounded in the everyday world, built upon reflection on lived experience within our own positionalities, a mixed-race, transnational, lesbian feminist, and is focused on how power works so that we might challenge and change it. It is her commitment to the difficult work of social change and social justice that led her to a second vital aspect of her scholarship, using interviews with others engaged in social justice work to further follow words through their everyday circulation in institutional settings. This work initially focused on racial diversity workers in the UK and Australia universities. More recently, her attention has shifted to those involved in institutional complaint processes, which we'll hear more about in a few minutes. Reflecting on her own engagements with institutional racism, sexism, and homophobia in academic settings, her talk today investigates the tangled institutional processes and subjective effects of making harassment and discrimination complaints. Last spring, when the Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies faculty decided to invite Dr. Ahmed to present this year's Korenman lecture, we could not know that the campus would be absorbed with its own Title IX challenges when she arrived. However, at this juncture in our history, I suggest that we are indeed fortunate to have the opportunity to learn from, to think with, Sara Ahmed's feminist pedagogy. In particular, I want to note an aspect of her work that many of us in the feminist academic trenches appreciate most. That is her incisive accounts of the often painful, always exhausting struggles that social justice work involves, as well as the hope and the wonder that keeps us committed to it. And it is in the spirit of hopeful struggle that I ask you to please join me in welcoming Sara Ahmed as she talks with us today about complaint as diversity work.
Thank you, both of you, for your wonderful, generous introductions. I'm quite fond of the relentlessly feminist. Might put that on my blog. And thank you especially to Courtney Hobson for all your work in bringing me here. I'm very pleased to be here, and today I'm going to be talking about Mind the Gap, complaint as diversity work. So my lecture today is an attempt to think through the experience of complaint, to think about that experience, and to think with those who make complaints. I'll be drawing on interviews I've conducted with staff and students who've made complaints within universities that relate to unfair, unjust, or unequal working conditions, or to abuses of power, such as harassment and bullying. I want to give room to complaint, to listen to complaint, in order to counter a history that has become routine, in which those who complain are dismissed, rendered incredible. The mere fact of making a complaint can be used against the one who complains. An early career lecturer who made a complaint about how her university mishandled her sick leave was told that her ability to complain was evidence she was not unwell. If I was well enough to stamp my foot and complain, then I was well enough to work. Stamp my foot and complain, because she could hear how she was being heard. We too have the opportunity to hear something, how a complaint is audible as a tantrum, how the complainer is cast as spoiled, how a grievance is heard as a grudge. Being able to complain about an oppressive situation is used as evidence that you're not really oppressed by that situation. To complain within an organisation so often brings you up against it. And she realized through making the complaint that I wasn't just a person who was off sick, I was a person who had a grievance against the way I had been treated at the university. And in making the complaint, she finds out that other people in her department had also made complaints. It was quite amazing, actually, to find that in my department there were more than a handful of staff who were there complaining about the same issues. But all of us were doing it not in silence, but in an atomized way, so that none of us knew, actually, that we were all having similar problems and were making similar complaints. However much procedures can be used to atomize, to individuate, and to separate, a complaint can lead you to recognize what is shared, similar complaints, similar problems. This is how the work of trying to address a problem can lead you to recognize the scale of that problem. She describes what it was like to do the work. It was like a little bird scratching away at something, and it wasn't really having any effect. It was just really small, 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 and behind closed doors. I think people maybe feel that because of the nature of the complaint, and you're off work, so they have to be polite and not talk about it. And so much of their politeness is because they don't want to say something. And maybe it is to do with being in an institution and the way they are built. Long corridors, doors with locks on them, windows with blinds that come down. It seems to sort of imbue every part of it with a cloistered feeling. There is no air. It feels suffocating. It was like, note this it. A complaint as something you are doing can acquire exteriority, becoming a thing in the world, scratching away, a little bird, all your energy going into an activity that matters so much to what you can do and who you can be, but barely seems to leave a trace the more you try. The smaller it becomes, you become smaller, smaller still. Sensing the scale of a problem can also mean sensing just what little room you have. And a complaint is made confidential as soon as it is lodged, so all this happens behind closed doors. A complaint as a secret, as a source of shame, as what keeps you apart from others. And a complaint becomes like a magnifying glass, so much appears, so many details picked up by an attention. The intensity of an experience can be illuminating. The geography of a place, the building, the long corridors, the locked doors, the windows with blinds that can come down, less light, less room, you cannot breathe, cloistered, suffocating. Long corridors, locked doors, windows with blinds that come down. These are familiar features of our built environment, but they might also be teaching us something about how institutions work, for whom they work, how passages are opened up or closed, how routes are enabled or disenabled, how some are given room to breathe, others not. A complaint as diversity work, the work we have to do because we are not accommodated, the work we have to do in order to be accommodated. I was inspired to do this project after taking part myself in a series of inquiries into sexual harassment and sexual misconduct prompted by a collective complaint lodged by students. I learnt so much from the work they did to keep that complaint going. I understand this project as being part of a shared struggle to rebuild universities, to enable them to become more accommodating. And some of my companions in thought are Gloria Vecker, Leila Whitley, Tiffany Page, Shirley Tate, and Heidi Mirza, amongst many, many others. My lecture today is thinking with those I've spoken to. The complainers are my guides. They are my feminist philosophers. They are my critical theorists. And they're also my collective, a complaint collective. Because this material is confidential, I'll be sharing only fragments from each story. A complaint can be a shattering, like a broken jug. We can be left in pieces. I'll be picking up some of these pieces today, not in order to create the illusion of some unbroken thing, but so that we can learn from the sharpness of each piece how they fit together. So this first section is called Institutional Mechanics. So making a complaint can require becoming an institutional mechanic. You have to work out how to get a complaint through the system. And it is because of the difficulty of getting through that many complaints end up being about a system. This point might seem counterintuitive because organisations, as we know, typically have their own complaints procedures. So you might say, surely to make a complaint is to follow the procedure for making a complaint. Things are not always as they seem. On paper, it can seem as if making a complaint is a rather linear process. Indeed, in the UK, in the case of student complaints, a procedure is often represented as a flowchart with powers and arrows that give the would-be complainant a clear route through. The clarity of a procedure can be used to indicate a commitment. Organisations often use complaint procedures as evidence that they've dealt with a problem. So one university writes that complaints will assist in identifying problems and trends across the university, and then they then write that complaints will form the basis of positive publicity in demonstrating that identified issues have been resolved. So when complaints record a problem, they can be quickly folded into a solution, a record of how universities have resolved something, resolution, dissolution. Resolutions can be problems given new forms. Listening to those who have made or tried to make formal complaints has taught me that the gap between what is supposed to happen and what does happen is densely populated. And this gap is where my study is located. I am minding the gap. I spoke to one administrator about her work in supporting students through a complaint process. So your first stage will require the complainant to try and resolve it informally, which is really difficult in some situations, and which is where it might get stuck in a department. And so it takes a very tenacious complaining student to say, no, I'm being blocked. If something bad has happened and you're not feeling that way inclined, you can understand why a student would not have the tenacity to make sure that happens. So you can imagine that something on paper that looks very linear is actually very circular a lot of the time, and I think that's the problem. Students get discouraged and get demoralised and feel hard done by, and nothing's getting resolved, and they are in a murky place, and they can't get out. So if a procedure exists in order to clear a path, that path can be blocked at any point. And a complaint is not simply an outcome of a no. A complaint requires that you keep saying no along the way. And this practitioner acknowledges that what is required to proceed with a complaint, in her terms, confidence and tenacity, might be what is eroded by the very experiences that led to complaint. Something bad has happened, not feeling that way inclined. To mind the gap is to listen and to learn from those who experience a process. And I've been here before, minding the gap. In an earlier project, I talked to diversity and equal opportunities practitioners based in British and Australian universities. So one practitioner described the word diversity as a big, shiny apple. It all looks wonderful, but the inequalities aren't being addressed. So diversity can be used, rather like complaints procedures, as a way of appearing to address a problem. And the use of diversity can then be a sign of the difficulty of getting through, the difficulty of addressing those inequalities. So this practitioner also described her own job thus: it's a banging your head against the brick wall job. So here, a job description is a wall description. And if you keep banging your head against that brick wall, but the wall keeps its place, it is you that gets sore. And what happens to the wall? All you seem to have done is scratch the surface, and this is what doing diversity work often feels like, scratching the surface, scratching at the surface. And we can think back as well to that description of a complaint as a little bird scratching away at something. Scratching gives you a sense of the limits of what you can accomplish. I want to return to one example from this earlier research, as it has much to teach us about institutional mechanics That is, the means by which things are stopped. So in this example, a diversity practitioner is trying to get a new policy agreed so that all members of academic appointment panels will receive diversity training. So this is a story, I call it a wall story, which means it's rather long, and I'm going to read it out in its full length because it tells you something about what it's like to do this work. So she says, when I was first here, there was a policy that you had to have 3 people in every panel who had been diversity trained. But then there was a decision early on when I was here that it should be everybody, all panel members, at least internal people. They took that decision at the Equality and Diversity Committee, which several members of SMT were present at. But then the Director of Human Resources found out about it and decided we didn't have the resources to support it, and it went to Council with that taken out. Only Council were told they were happy to have just 3 members. Only a person on Council who was an external member of the Diversity Committee went ballistic. And I'm not kidding, went ballistic and said the minutes didn't reflect what had happened in the meeting because the minutes said the decision was difficult to what actually happened, and I didn't take the minutes, by the way. And so they had to take it through and reverse it. And the Council decision was that all people should be trained. And despite that, I have then sat in meetings where they've just continued saying that it has to be just 3 people on the panel. And I said, but no, Council changed their view and I can give you the minutes. And they just look at me as if I'm saying something really stupid. This went on for ages, even though the Council minutes definitely said all panel members should be trained. And to be honest, sometimes you just give up. So here, a decision made in the present about the future is overridden by the momentum of the past. The past becomes like a well-worn path. What usually happens still happens. And note then that the head of human resources did not need to take the policy out of the minutes for the policy not to come into effect. I've called this dynamic non-performativity, when naming something does not bring something into effect, or when something is named in order not to bring something into effect. So here, what stopped something from happening could have been the removal of the policy from the minutes, or it could have been the failure of anyone at Council to notice that removal, but it wasn't. The policy was stopped by how those within the institution acted after it had been agreed, and so we learn agreeing to something can become another way of stopping something from happening. So the story of how the wall keeps standing is the same story as the story of how a diversity worker ends up shattered. As she said, eventually you might just give up. And consider all of the energy that she expended on getting a policy agreed that does not do anything. It is not just the policy, but the work of creating that policy that disappears from general view. You can end up feeling like all you did not happen, or even that you somehow did not happen as they look at you as if you're saying something really stupid, as if you don't exist. Perhaps you were heard as that little bird scratching away, interrupting the flow of a meeting. So let's return to the work of minding the gap between what does happen and what is supposed to happen. Complaints too can be all the more difficult because so much of what happens around them is treated by those around them as if it's not happening at all. And remember too that what happens when a complaint is made often happens behind closed doors, and those doors can be closed to those who make the complaint, so that it's hard to know what is happening, even though you know that what is happening is not what is supposed to be happening. So an early career lecturer who was sexually harassed by a senior professor in her department describes her experience thus: it is like being trapped in some kind of weird dream where you know you jump from one section to another because you never know the narrative. I think that's the power that institutional abuse has on you. Making a complaint can feel like becoming a character in someone else's story. What happens to you is dependent on decisions that are made without your knowledge or consent. And this is why making a complaint about harassment can often feel like being harassed all over again, becoming subjected again to another's will. The gap between what does happen and what should happen can be what you fall through, or how you fall through. Cracks in the system are, as it were, part of the system. After all, this sign, I'm sure you're familiar with from the London Underground, Mind the Gap, is offered as advice and also as a rather sensible warning. And warnings are useful because they introduce notion of caution predicated not on abstract rules about rights and wrongs, but on somebody's own health and safety. When you are trying to make a complaint, you are frequently warned about the consequences of complaining. So one student describes, I was repeatedly told that rocking the boat or making waves would affect my career in the future and that I'd ruin the department for everyone else. I was told if I did put in a complaint, I would never be able to work in the university and that it was likely I wouldn't get a job elsewhere. So complaining here is framed as self-damage as well as damage to others, ruining a department no less. And this student describes for us how the pressure not to complain was exerted. In just one day, I was subjected to 8 hours of grueling meetings and questioning, almost designed to break me and stop me from taking the complaint any further. So you can stop someone from doing something by making it harder for them to do something. And we might note here how warnings can operate not simply as predictive utterances, but also as threats. So she commented on how the head department made reference to her source of funding during one of these meetings, to be reminded of how she is dependent upon the department for resources, is to be told how they can be the ones who can make her topple over. And it might be that some programs come with warnings built into them. A postdoctoral researcher, a woman of colour, wanted to make a complaint about racial discrimination, but she was hired as part of a diversity program. And she knew that that program was precarious. I don't want to do something that is going to threaten a program that is supposed to diversify the faculty. Diversity as a promise to transform the institution often ends up being located in students and scholars of colour who are assumed to be here because we bring diversity with us, however it is we got here. And that can make it even harder to address the problems we have when we get here, which are not unrelated to how we got here. She used the term coercive diversity for how the university wanted to make use of her body and her face on its brochures, as well as her research as evidence of its diversity, whilst undermining her work as a colleague, as an early career scholar, and indeed as a human being. So warnings often articulate a no, don't go there, be careful, danger. But complaints can also be stopped by the appearance of being heard, even by a yes, I'm listening. An academic brings a complaint to her line manager. She says, I would say he's a yes man. So whenever I talked to him, he would say yes. But I knew the yes was definitely not a yes. It was a we'll see. Perhaps a yes can be said because there's not enough behind that yes to bring something about. We are back to the non-performative, given bodily expression perhaps as a nod, a yes, yes, a nod, nod. She describes yes saying as a management technique. This weird, almost magical thing that happens when you speak to people in management. When you go in there and you're kind of ready for it, and you're really fired up and you kind of put your complaint, your case, your story to the person, and then you sort of leave as if a spell has been cast, leave feeling like, okay, something might happen. And then that kind of wears off a few hours later and you think, oh my gosh. It's like a sleight of hand, almost like a trick. You feel tricked. That feeling that something might happen is what is being achieved here. To be left with a sense you are getting somewhere might be how you end up not getting somewhere. A yes can stop a complaint from progressing by diffusing the energy of the one who complains. Getting a complaint out becomes a little bit like letting off steam, puff, puff. And once you've got a complaint out of your system, the complaint is then out of the system. I think of this as venting. And venting can function institutionally rather like a pressure relief valve. You let off just enough pressure so that it does not build up and cause an explosion. So another method of stopping a complaint is to declare a complaint not a complaint because it doesn't fulfill the technical requirements to be a complaint. For example, a member of staff made a complaint about bullying from her head of department, and that experience had been so devastating and she'd suffered from depression as a result. So it took her a long time to get to the point when she could put a complaint together. She describes what happens once she was able to put it in. I basically did it when I was able to because I was just really unwell for a significant period of time, and I put in the complaint, and the response that I got was from the deputy VC. He said that he couldn't process my complaint because I had taken too long to lodge it. Some experiences are so devastating that it takes time to process them, and the length of time taken can be used to disqualify the complaint. So the tightening of the complaint as a genre, the complaint as a requirement to fill in a certain form in a certain way at a certain time, can be how many struggles are not recorded. So if organisations can disqualify complaints because they take too long to make or for some other reason, they can also take too long in accordance with their own procedures to respond to complaints. So one student described how the university took 7 months to respond to her complaint. It was supposed to take 3. And then another 7 months to respond to her response to their response to her complaint. And she has a theory about what's going on here. It is my theory they've been putting in a long finger and pulling this out, dragging this out over unacceptable periods of time to try and tire me out so that I'll just give up. So sometimes it seems that exhaustion is not just the effect, but the point of the complaint process. So exhaustion becomes a management technique. You tire people out, they're too tired to address what makes them too tired. I've used the term strategic inefficiency to point to how organisations have an interest in stopping and slowing complaints. So we might think of inefficiency as annoying, yes, but indiscriminate, affecting everybody and everything. But listening to those who've complained has taught me just how inefficiency can be discriminatory. So an international student was waiting for her complaint to be processed whilst her visa was running out. 10 days before my visa was about to run out, I applied for a new visa. And they were like, how can we give her a visa? She's on probation. You have to have good standing to get a visa. And they were like, this complaint thing is open. For students and staff who are more precarious because of their residential, employment or financial status, the longer a complaint is kept open, the more you have to lose. So there is a connection, I would say, between the discriminatory effects of inefficiency and the efficiency with which organisations reproduce themselves as being for certain kinds of people, those whose papers are in the right place, those who are in the right place, those who are upright, able, well-resourced and well-connected. So you can lodge a complaint and still nothing happens. Perhaps complaints end up in a filing cabinet. Filing is filing away. So one student said of her complaint, it gets shoved in a box. Another said it has gone into the complaint graveyard. When a complaint is filed away or binned or buried, those who complain can end up feeling that they too have been filed away or binned or buried. We need to remember that a complaint is a record of what happens to a person. Complaints are personal. They are also records of what happens in institutions. Complaints are institutional. The personal is institutional. One academic researcher shared her complaint file with me. One of the things I talked about in these documents, I'm very open. I was under such stress and trauma that my period stopped. That's the intimacy of some of the things that go into it. Bodily functions like this. A body can stop functioning. A body can announce a complaint. That body is in a document, and that document is in a file, and that file is in a cabinet. To file a complaint can mean to become alienated from your own history, a history of alienation, a history that is often difficult, painful, and traumatic. This second section is called In the Thick of It. So I focus thus far on what happens to complaints, on the mechanisms by which complaints can be stopped. But complaints are not the starting point. You complain because of something that has happened or a situation that you're in. So if complaints are about what precedes them, complaints take us back. They have a kind of queer temporality, a backwards temporality. So one student, I'm going to take you back now. She gives an account of turning up at a postgraduate retreat. They were making jokes that were horrific. They were doing it in a very small space in front of staff and nobody was saying anything. And I felt like my reaction to it was out of kilter with everyone else. It felt really disconnected, the way I felt about the way they were behaving and the way everybody else was laughing. They were talking about milking bitches. I still can't quite get to the bottom of where the jokes were coming from. Nobody was saying anything about it. People were just laughing along. You started to stand out in that way. You were just not playing along. So that sexist expression, milking bitches, seemed to have a history. And each time that expression is used, history is thrown out like a line you have to follow if you are to get anywhere. When laughter fills the room like water in a cup, laughter as holding something, it can feel like there's no room left. To experience such jokes as offensive is to become alienated, not only from the jokes, but the laughter that surrounds them, propping them up, giving them somewhere to go. So just by not laughing, not going along with something, she starts to stand out. You can become a killjoy just by not laughing. I think this is very important because it also suggests that a complaint can be registered, that is by others, without having to say anything. It can be expressed by how a body is not attuned to the requirements of an environment. And to express here can mean to squeeze something out. And sometimes a complaint seems to come out or get squeezed out, rather like liquid, being squeezed through the cracks in a wall. So in another instance, a junior female lecturer was sexually harassed by a senior male professor in her department, mainly through constant verbal communications. For example, he emailed her about wanting to suck her toes. She thought she'd handle this by asking her line manager to ask him to stop, not knowing that her manager had sat on that request. So when an attempt to stop harassment is stopped, harassment does not stop. And then I was in a meeting with my line manager and her line manager, and we were in this little office space, like a glass fishbowl type meeting room. And then the main office where all the staff desks were, and he emailed me and I made a sound, there's no way to articulate it. Someone's just dragging your insides like a meat grinder. Oh God, this is not going to stop. And I made that sound out loud, and my line manager said, what's happened? And I turned my computer around and showed him, and he said, for fuck's sake, how stupid do you have to be to put that in an email? You could see a look of panic on her face, like, crap, this has not magically gone away. That's a second reference to magic, like the magic trick. You magically make the complaint go away, but the harassment stays. And that sound, pierces the meeting, that meeting taking place in the little glass room, the fishbowl, where they can all be seen. Something can become visible and audible, sometimes even despite yourself. A complaint is what comes out because you can't take it anymore. You just can't take it anymore. Your inside's like a meat grinder. A complaint is how you are turned inside out. And note how the problem, once acknowledged, is implied to be not so much the harassment as such, but that there was evidence of it. For fuck's sake, how stupid do you have to be to put that in an email? And that sound, that becomes a complaint because it brings to the surface a violence that would otherwise not have to be faced. Remember those windows, the blinds that come down. We learn how violence is often dealt with by not being faced. And it is then as if that complaint, that sound, brings the violence into existence by forcing it to be faced. Going back to the case of the postgraduate student, it is because she experiences what is in the room as being violent, that the violence that is in the room is then channeled into her in her direction. He specifically went for me verbally at a table where everyone was eating lunch. It was a large table with numerous amounts of people around it, including staff. I was having quite a personal conversation with someone, and he literally leant across the table, physically came forward. He was slightly ajar to me. He was really close, and he said, "Oh my God, I can see you ovulating." Because she does not find the jokes funny, because she expressed that she was not condoning his behavior, because she is not happy with what is going on, he comes after her. Her personal space is invaded, words flung out, flung at, she is reduced to body pulled back, woman as ovaries. She is not allowed to do her own thing, to have a conversation with others, to be occupied as a student. She describes what follows her experience. I think the staff member knew I was deeply upset by it. I pretty much left the table, and he followed me out and started a conversation. This is probably in hindsight where it started to get difficult. And that staff member started to lean on me. Immediately said to me, oh, you know what he's like, he's got a really strange sense of humour, he didn't mean anything by it, and the implication was I was being a bit oversensitive, and that I couldn't take a joke, and then I need to sort of forget about it and move on. Note then that there is an effort to stop the student from complaining about the situation in the situation. She is told not to say anything, not to be oversensitive, not to do anything, not to cause trouble. And the staff member, by leaning in this way, positions himself with the harasser, treating the verbal onslaught as a joke, as something she should take and keep taking. The harasser physically comes forward, the staff member leans on her. The response to harassment is harassment, and that is the institutional response. So harassment can be the effort to stop you identifying harassment as harassment, which means that the one who identifies harassment is harassed all the more. The experiences that lead to complaint and the experiences of complaint are thus hard to untangle. They are often part of the same experience. If complaints take us back, they are also imminent. They are about what we are in. Sometimes you might have to complain because you can't even get in. An academic describes how she has to keep pointing out that the rooms are inaccessible because they keep booking rooms that are inaccessible. She has to keep saying it because they keep doing it. I worry about drawing attention to myself, but this is what happens when you hire a person in a wheelchair. There have been major access issues at the university. And she spoke of the drain, the exhaustion, the sense of why should I have to be the one who speaks out? You have to speak out because others do not, and because you speak out, others can justify their silence. They hear you, so it becomes about you. Major access issues, your issues. And a complaint then is treated almost like a broken record, as if she is the one who is stuck on the same point. When we complain because of what we come up against, we come up against what we complain about. By complaint as diversity work, I'm also talking about that work of minding the gap between how things are and how they are supposed to be or how they appear to be, that access sign that says inclusion. That gap can be how you are stopped. So minding the gap could also be thought of, I think, as wall work. Wall work is work because structures often disappear for those who are enabled by them. I think of wall work as philosophical as well as practical work. We know from how things go. What is supposed to be or appears to be is the view, you might say, the university has of itself. This is diversity as weak universality, that shiny apple. The university is open to everyone, or welcome, come in, come in. That view might be shared by those for whom the university is open. You might experience the university as open if the university was open to you. To encounter a wall is to learn that which has been deemed the quality of a thing, the university is open, is in fact the quality of a relation. The university is open to some. When the two disappears, that some becomes universal. So the wall gives concrete expression to the failure of universalism. This is what I mean by the complainer as our philosopher. No wonder we keep making the same points. If you have to keep pointing to structures that work by receding from general view, you end up standing out. It becomes about you. So wall work then becomes where you end up. You might end up on the diversity committee. We often end up on the diversity committee because of who you are not. Not white, not cis, not able-bodied, not man, not straight. The more nots you are, the more committees you end up on. But you're still supposed to do that work with a smile. A woman of colour academic described to me, I was on the equality and diversity group in the university, and as soon as I started mentioning things to do with race, they changed the portfolio of who could be on that committee, and I was dropped. So certain words carry a complaint. You just have to say the word race or racism and you're heard as complaining, going on about it again. A complaint then can be as much about how you are received as what you send out. She added, whenever you raise something, the response is that you are not one of them. Not one of them. I think back to that broken record, and maybe this is where the record gets stuck. Not one of them, not one of them, not one of them. A complaint seems to amplify what makes you not fit, picking up upon what you are not. And a complainer then becomes a foreigner, a complaint, a confirmation that you're not from here. Not really, not here. So a complaint that you do not belong can be used as evidence that you do not belong. An early career lecturer describes, I've been told I have a chip on my shoulder, that I've got a chip on my shoulder because I'm Jewish, that I have a chip on my shoulder because I'm foreign living in this country and you're upset about Brexit, or because you're gay and you're just looking for the problems. And you start thinking, am I looking for these problems? I just turn it inwards. Is it me? Is it my fault? I lie away at night thinking, is it actually a problem with me here? Chip, chip, chip. If we chip away at the old block, no wonder they keep finding that chip on our shoulder. The more knots you have, the more knots you are, the more chips they find. But if you keep having a problem, you can still end up feeling that the problem is with you. It can be exhausting coming up against the same thing. So another academic describes, and then of course you get witch hunted, you get scapegoated, you become the troublesome uppity woman, you become the woman who does not fit, you become everything the bully accuses of you are because nobody is listening to you. And you hear yourself starting to take that, not petulant tone, bangs table, come on. You can hear them saying, oh, there you go. A diversity practitioner had said something very similar to me many years ago, that she had only had to open her mouth in meetings to witness eyes rolling as if to say, oh, here she goes. Both times we laughed. It can be a relief to have an experience, however difficult, put into words. The feminist killjoy, that leaky container, she comes up here. She comes up in what we can hear. We hear each other in the wear and the tear of the words we share. We hear what it's like to come up against the same thing over and over again. We imagine those eyes rolling as if to say, well, she would say that. It was from experiences like this that I developed my equation, rolling eyes equals feminist pedagogy. So this third section is called Closing the Door. I open my lecture tonight by showing how complaint can lead to an institution being registered all the more intensely. The corridors, the windows of blinds that come down, doors with locks on them. Doors keep coming up in my data. I'm speaking to an academic about the first complaint she made when she was a student. One of the lecturers on her course had been making her feel uncomfortable. So one time she enters his room. And then one afternoon I went into his office to talk to him about something. It was an office a bit like this, but without any glass, with a door that opened inwards and opened on a latch. And he pushed me up against the back of a door and tried to kiss me, and I pushed him away. It was an instinctive pushed him away and tried to get out of the room. And it was a horrible moment because I realized I couldn't actually. It was very difficult to operate the latch. We are back to the door, the back of the door. A door without a glass, solid, can't be seen through. A door is what you're pushed against. The latch that won't open, getting stuck, trying to get out. The work you have to do to get out. She did get out, but it was hard. Behind closed doors, harassment happens there, out of view, in secret. It can be locked in and locked out. Doors have something else to teach us. They teach us the significance of a complaint about harassment being lodged in the same place the harassment happened. A door is shut on her. The same door is shut on the complaint, the same door. So what does she do? She submits an informal complaint, a letter detailing the assault. And where does her complaint go? Her letter ends up with the dean. And what does the dean do? The dean basically told me I should sit down and have a cup of tea with this guy to sort it out. So often a response to a complaint about harassment is to minimize that harassment as if what occurred is just a minor squabble between two parties, something that can be sorted out by a cup of tea, that English signifier of reconciliation. A complaint then will become our failure, your failure, her failure to resolve the situation more amicably. She does not proceed to a formal complaint. Her complaint was stopped. He was not. Now I say her complaint was stopped rather than she was stopped because she did go on to have a career. She is now a professor. But this experience of being assaulted when she was a student stayed with her. She describes, "I thought I got a first because of academic merit, but then after this happened I remember thinking, but hang on, maybe not. Maybe this was some sort of ruse to try and keep me in the institution so we could keep the contact going. It starts undermining your own sense of your academic merit, the quality of your work and all that kind of stuff. Being harassed by a lecturer damages your sense of self-worth, intellectual worth, leading you to question yourself, doubt yourself. Her complaint was stopped, she was not, but she carries that history with her. Her complaint was stopped, he was not. What happened to him?" She tells us. "He was a known harasser. There were lots of stories told about him. I had a friend who was very vulnerable. He took advantage of that. She ended up taking her own life." She ended up taking her own life, so much more pain, so much more damage. At the edges of this one woman's story of damage, he went on. He was allowed to go on when her complaint, and for all we know there were others too. We do not know how many said no, did not stop him. He has since retired, much respected by his peers, no blemish on his record, no blemish on his record, no blemish on the institution's record. The damage carried by those who did complain or would complain if they could complain is carried around like baggage, slow, heavy down. To hear complaint is to hear from those weighed down by a history that has not left a trace in the official records. And organisations become aligned with those who abuse power given to them by virtue of position because they share an interest in stopping what is recorded by a complaint from getting out. So damage to a person is deflected by being treated as potential damage to the institution and damage to a person if a person is indeed identified by a complaint. And that damage is often evoked through or as concern for consequence for how much he or they would have to lose, reputation, status, standing, and so on. He or they, he and they is perhaps all we need to say. It is not just his standing, but their standing that matters. And complaints about harassment are often received by those who share a standing. When another student made a complaint after being sexually assaulted by her lecturer, this time he forced himself on her in his office. After locking the door, she is called to a meeting. She describes it for us. One, the professor said, laughing, for instance, he's always like this, isn't he? Always very seductive and funny. He's been always like this since we were studying together. He also touches me when talking. What so? While the other was saying, I've known him for so many years and must be some misunderstanding for sure, while the other was just smiling and nodding before even having heard what I had to say. We could understand what is going on in this meeting as top-down bullying from senior management, and that is going on, but that's not the only thing going on. A history is being casually evoked, studying together, I've known him for years, a complaint about assault, dismissed as misunderstanding, smiling, nodding, that nodding is a non-performative. It is right, he is right, you are wrong, he is being wronged. So a complaint can be stopped because of what is shared, who is shared, friendships, loyalties, personal and professional, affection becoming like cement in a wall, a bond, a bind, be kind, he is one of our kind. So when we're talking about closing doors on a complaint, we're also talking about closing ranks. Their backs become doors. Another student described to me, they have each other's backs. So what's important here as well is that these historic connections, these past friendships, are being kept alive as communication pathways. A complaint seems to function rather like a switch or an alarm or an alert that triggers a reaction. It is how a network comes alive to protect those who are the most networked. You can almost hear the buzz of electricity or the sound of the phone lines becoming busy. So when an MA student indicated she wanted to make a complaint about the conduct of the most senior member of her department, she was told by the convener of the program, be careful, he is an important man. Be careful here, a warning not to proceed, is a statement about who is important. And importance is not just a judgment, it is a direction. She went ahead in this instance with a complaint, and in her terms, she sacrificed the references. In reference to the prospect of doing a PhD, she said, that door is closed. That door is closed. References to can function as doors, mechanisms that enable an opening or closing, how it's made possible for some to progress, others not. Reference systems are paper trails, let us in out. They are how some are enabled by their connections, how some gather speed and velocity more and more, faster and faster. He is an important man. A paper trail, a path, a route, a narrow corridor. You have to go down that narrow corridor to reach an open door. You have to go through a professor to get anywhere. So I think of this as institutional funneling, how paths become narrower and narrower at the exit points, and that funneling is how many complaints are stopped. Many do not make complaints because they feel that they cannot afford to lose the references, to lose the connections. So we learn that power can work through what might seem to be a very light touch. To close a door, you just have to lift a hand, the mere lift of a supportive hand. A less positive reference can function as the heaviest of weights. Slow, heavy, down. I want to return to my suggestion that diversity work is wall work. Wall work is work because what you come up against does not appear to others. Doors can be shut despite appearing to be open. Look, come in. Or even through appearing to be open. We might think of how diversity itself is often represented as an open door. We are back to that welcome. One university transforms this open door into a project of attaching photographs of Black and minority ethnic staff and students to door panels across the campus. So here the Vice-Chancellor is indeed figured as holding the door open, and BME students and staff are pictured not even as going through the door, but as being on the door. Just because they welcome you doesn't mean they expect you to turn up. We learn from what comes up when we turn up. A Black woman academic was racially harassed and bullied by a white woman colleague. I think what she wanted to do was to maintain her position as the director, and I was supposed to be some pleb, you know what I mean? She had to be the boss and I had to be the servant kind of thing. That was how her particular version of white supremacy worked. So not just belittling my academic credentials and academic capabilities, but also belittling me in front of the students, belittling me in front of the administrators. How do you know it's about race? That's a question we're often asked. Racism is how we know it's about race, that wall whiteness, or let's call it what it is. As she has, white supremacy, we come to know it intimately because it keeps coming up. She told me, I put down that I would like to work towards becoming a professor, and she just laughed in my face. That laughter, the sound of a door slamming. To have got there, a Black woman in a white institution, a lecturer, senior lecturer on her way to becoming a professor, she is now a professor, is to be understood as above your station, as getting ahead of yourself, as getting above yourself. To belittle someone, to make them little, functions as a command, be little. And that command is being sent not only to her, but to those who share her status of being subordinate, deemed subordinate, students and administrators. So harassment here is a message sent out. You are not where you should be, you are above where you should be, you are even where I should be, or even you have taken my place. So we are back to doors, how backs become doors. A social category can be a house, a professor can be a building. Some of us in becoming professors become trespassers. You're being told you need permission to enter by being told you do not have their permission. And that message can be shared with affection. When another white colleague becomes head of department, that colleague says, I want you to reconcile with her because after all, she is my friend and colleague, and all she ever did was write you some long emails. She is my friend, not one of us, she is my friend. Racial harassment is reduced to a style of communication, and the damage caused becomes damage to a friend, damage to a white friend, damage even to whiteness. So that expression of a desire for reconciliation might appear to be a friendly gesture, but there's nothing friendly about that gesture. If a Black woman does not return the desire for reconciliation, if she's not willing to smooth things over, moving on, getting along, she becomes mean, the one who's not only broken a connection, but refused to repair it. So whiteness here is reproduced as sympathy, and that sympathy has become part of the machinery. A machinery can lean, a machine can lean, can be built out of leanings, friendly-like. In the end, she can't take it anymore, and she moves first to a different department and then to a different university. She goes on, and there are very few people left to work on race. Another woman of colour described her department as a revolving door, women and ethnic minorities enter, only to head right out again, whoosh, whoosh. We can be kept out by what we find out when we get in. Perhaps we learn what is in from those who get out. Perhaps that is what my project is about. So this is my conclusion. When you begin a formal complaint, you might not necessarily think of yourself as a critic of the institution, nor as being part of a project of dismantling the institution. But that's where many who make complaints end up. And an end point can be a starting point. Complaints can also be what we are doing when we are trying not to reproduce the same thing, same old, same old. When those who try to stop the same thing from being reproduced are stopped, the same thing is reproduced. You can be stopped by how you are framed. A complaint is received as damage. Even to ask questions about who is here, who is not here, who is speaking, who is not speaking, who is being cited, who is not being cited, is deemed to cause damage, as an act of vandalism even, the willful destruction of the venerable and the beautiful. In the UK, for instance, decolonising the curriculum has been framed as vandalism, a willful destruction of our universals, cutting off the heads of statues, snapping at the thrones of the philosopher kings. You can't be serious. Yes, we can. Even if in doing our work we only seem to scratch the surface, we can still be liable for damages. We have to live with what we are deemed to have caused. Diversity work can also be then what we have to do to survive, but also how we survive what we have to do. I think of Audre Lorde. I often think of Audre Lorde. We were never meant to survive. Lorde shows us how, for some at least, survival can be politically ambitious, and it can require us to be inventive. It can require we chip away at those walls, however much they keep finding those chips on our shoulders. Diversity work, transforming institutions can be necessary if we are to survive them. Diversity work, we have to survive the institutions we are trying to transform, and so diversity work, the work we do to survive the work we do. I am listening to an Indigenous woman academic. She told me how she could hardly manage to get to campus after a sustained campaign of bullying and harassment from white faculty, including a concerted effort by a senior manager to sabotage her tenure case, as well as a tenure case of other Indigenous academics. She made a formal grievance that did not get anywhere. I had to send an email to her with a subject line in all capital letters with an exclamation point. My final email to her after 7 months. This is a grievance. This is a grievance. And her obligation under the university rules and the process is that she should put it forward. She did not. She did not put it forward. That institutional machinery, that machine, clunk, clunk. When you are harassed and bullied, when doors are closed and slammed, making it hard to get anywhere, it can be history that you're thrown up against. And so when complaints take us back, they can take us back even further and further still to histories that are still. She describes, there is a genealogy of experience, a genealogy of consciousness in my body that is now at this stage traumatized beyond the capacity to go to the university. So there's a legacy, a genealogy, and I haven't really opened that door too widely as I've been so focused on my experience in the last 7 years. To be traumatized is to hold a history in a body you can easily shatter. There is only so much you can take on because there's only so much you can take in. Consciousness too can be about doors. If we sometimes put what is hardest to handle behind a closed door, you often have to open those doors to reach what is hardest. And we can inherit closed doors. The trauma can be inherited by being made inaccessible, all that happened that was too hard or too painful to reveal. Decolonial feminist work, black feminist work, feminist of colour work is often then about opening doors. It is hard work to open oneself to what is hard, the doors to what came before, colonial legacies, genealogies, harassment as the hardening of that history, a history of who gets to do what, who is deemed entitled to what, who is deemed entitled to who. A complaint can be necessary, what you have to do to go on, but you still have to work out what you can take on. And she went on by taking them on. I took everything off my door, my posters, my activism, my pamphlets. I smudged everything all around the building. I knew I was going to war. I did a war ritual in our tradition. I pulled down the curtain. I pulled on a mask. My people, we have a mask. And I never opened my door for a year. I just let it be a crack. And only my students could come in. I would not let a single person come into my office who I had not already invited there for a whole year. Closing a door can be a survival strategy. She closes the door to the institution by withdrawing herself, her commitments from it. She still does her work. She still teaches her students. She even makes use of the institution's door by using it to shut out what she can and who she can. She takes herself off the door. She depersonalizes it. And she pulls down the blinds and she pulls on a mask, the mask of her people, connecting her fight to the battles that came before, because quite frankly, for her, this is a war. Our battles are not the same battles, but I have been learning about the battles that happen behind closed doors. So tonight I've talked about some of them, sharing with you stories that have been shared with me. Behind closed doors, that is where complaints are often found, so that is where you might find us too, and what we bring us, who we bring with us, the worlds that would not be here if some of us were not here, the data we hold, our bodies, our memories. Perhaps the more we have to spill, the tighter the hold. Sometimes to get the information out, we have to become leaks, drip, drip. When I made my own reasons for my resignation public in protests against the failure to address sexual harassment as an institutional problem, I became a leak. I leaked information out. Not that much, but enough. Organisations will try and contain damage. The response, in other words, is damage limitation. This is how diversity often takes institutional form, as damage limitation. Happy, shiny policies will be put in place, holes left by departures filled without reference to what went on before, a block becoming something to be wiped up, wiped away, like you're mopping up a mess. But there is hope here, because I cannot mop up all of the mess. A leak can be a lead. A leak can be a feminist lead. I think of this lead as a finding. We find each other through complaints. Even when complaints lead us to leave, we leave something of ourselves behind by complaining. A postgraduate student made an informal complaint about white supremacy in her classroom. Using that kind of term for what is here at the university can get you into serious trouble. She knew that, but she was willing to do that. And she became, in her terms, a monster, an Indigenous feminist monster, and is now completing her PhD off campus. But she said that an unexpected little gift was how other students could come to her. They know you are out there and they can reach out to you. And she used that expression a few times, an unexpected little gift. So it might seem that complaints that do not get anywhere disappear without a trace. But in saying no, we keep a history alive. We do not let go. Sometimes you hold on by passing a refusal on. A complaint in taking you back can also point forward to those who come after, who can receive something from you because of what you try to do, even though you did not get through, even though all you seem to have done was scratch the surface. So yes, so scratches, we are back to those scratches. They seem to show the limits of what we accomplished, but they can also be what we leave behind. They can be testimony. A complaint as writing on the wall, we were here, we did not disappear. So those complaints in the graveyard can come back to haunt institutions. We can come back to haunt institutions. It is a promise. Thank you.